If you could say something to Jonbenet now.
She knew she was loved. I told her every day I love her, and I still do with my kids when I talk to them. As a father, I'm just sorry I didn't protect her. I'm sorry.
Police! What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am?
It is one of the greatest unsolved crimes in history.
We have a kidnapping. There's a ransom note here.
A little girl vanishes from home Christmas night.
It's just like you got hit in the stomach. Where's my child? I couldn't do anything but scream.
Keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there.
Were you a stage mother?
Probably. What's wrong with that?
We were planning to get up early and fly to Michigan to meet my older kids for like a second Christmas. Our normal routine like that, if we're gonna go somewhere, is let the kids stay in bed. And then when we're ready to go, we get them up and then we go. They might stay in their pajamas in the car.
Quite early in the morning, and I had gotten dressed and was on my way to the kitchen to make some coffee.
Well, I was shaving, I guess, in the bathroom.
And we have a back staircase from the bedroom areas, and I always come down that staircase, and I'm usually the first one down. And the note was lying across the run of one of the stair treads, and it was kind of dimly lit because it was very early in the morning. And I started to read it, and it was addressed to John.
A terrifying message scrawled across 3 pages.
It said, "We have your daughter."
I just heard Patsy scream. I could tell by her the scream that something horrible was going on. I didn't know what.
John Ramsey was suspected as the perpetrator at a very early stage of the investigation by the first person to take charge of the case, Linda Arndt.
Who killed Jonbenet? There's no doubt in my mind who killed Jonbenet. And while this investigation is still ongoing, I don't think it's appropriate that I say that name out.
How did he strike you?
Cordial.
Cordial?
Mm-hmm.
Upset?
Cordial.
Distraught?
Cordial.
Did it strike you at all that that was behavior that was unusual for somebody whose child was just kidnapped?
It's been my experience that people respond to trauma in different ways. So if someone has a response that is different from mine, I don't put judgment to it, I'll just note it.
As the detective on the scene that fateful morning, Arndt's observations of Ramsey's behavior and actions would shape her growing conviction that he was involved in the crime. Her account, detailed and vivid, reveals a series of moments that struck her as deeply unsettling, culminating in a chilling encounter that left her fearing for her safety and counting the bullets in her gun. It was just after 1 p.m. when the pivotal moment occurred. Arndt, feeling the mounting tension in the Ramsey household, had asked John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house again, top to bottom, for anything out of place. She gave them specific instructions not to touch anything, hoping to preserve the integrity of the scene. But when John headed straight to the basement, Arndt's instincts sharpened. Moments later, she heard Fleet White scream for an ambulance, a cry that pierced the air and signaled a grim discovery. Then, she saw John Ramsey emerge from the basement, carrying the lifeless body of his daughter, Jonbenet, up the last 3 steps. The sight was jarring. John held Jonbenet's stiffened body in front of him, his arms around her upper legs, her head positioned above his own. Her small frame was rigid, her face pale and unmistakably lifeless, a clear sign she had been dead for some time. Arndt's mind raced as she processed the scene. She ordered John to put Jonbenet down on the floor, and as she knelt beside the child, she leaned close to her face, confirming the obvious: Jonbenet was gone. John, positioned opposite her, leaned in as well, his face just inches from Arndt's. In that moment, their eyes locked in what Arndt later described as a nonverbal exchange she would never forget. It was a fleeting but profound interaction, charged with an intensity that made her skin crawl. John's expression, his proximity, and the way he carried himself in that moment struck her as anything but the grief-stricken demeanor of a father who had just found his murdered child.
And I see John Ramsey carrying Jonbenet up the last 3 steps from the basement. And my mind exploded. And everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense. And Jonbenet was clearly dead. Then she's been dead for a while. I ordered him to put Jonbenet down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me. And his face was just inches from mine. And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget. And he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And I told him to go back to the room and to dial 911.
Then came the question that deepened her unease. John, still leaning close, asked in a low voice, "Is she dead?" Arndt, stunned by the query, replied, "Yes, she's dead." The question felt hollow to her, almost performative. Jonbenet's body was rigid with rigor mortis, her skin cold and her eyes vacant. Arndt couldn't fathom how a father, having carried his daughter's clearly deceased body from the basement, could ask such a question unless he already knew the answer. To her it seemed like a calculated attempt to feign ignorance, to create a veneer of innocence. She noted the way John had handled the body, not cradling it with tenderness, but holding it out in a way, as if distancing himself from the act. His actions, from the moment he emerged with Jonbenet, felt staged to Arndt, as though he were orchestrating a scene rather than reacting to a tragedy. The weight of that moment hit Arndt like a tidal wave. Everything she had observed that morning, the oddities, the inconsistencies, suddenly clicked into place. Earlier, she had watched John in the kitchen, casually looking through his mail during what should have been a crisis. While the household waited for a supposed kidnapper's call that never came, John had remained in a separate room from his wife, Patsy, for much of the day, his demeanor cordial, but strangely detached. When the 10 a.m. deadline set by the ransom note passed without acknowledgement from anyone in the house, Arndt had noted the silence, the absence of urgency or panic from John. These details, small but significant, had been piling up in her mind, each one adding to her growing suspicion. Now, kneeling beside Jonbenet's body, with John's face inches from hers, Arndt felt a surge of fear. The nonverbal exchange, the way he carried the body, the insincere question, it all coalesced into a chilling certainty. She knew, in that instant, who was responsible. Her heart pounded as she became acutely aware of her isolation. She was alone in the house with John, Patsy, their pastor, and 4 family friends, and no backup had arrived despite her repeated calls. Her hand instinctively moved to her shoulder holster, where her gun rested. She tucked it closer, her fingers brushing against it, as she mentally counted her ammunition, 18 bullets.
And as we looked at each other, I remember, and I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right next to me and consciously counting I've got 18 bullets.
Why did you do that?
Because I didn't know if we'd all be alive when people showed up. I said everything made sense in that instance. And I knew what happened.
Do you think your fear was well-founded?
You bet I do. There's no doubt in my mind.
To this day?
Never wavered.
You were afraid because you thought the killer was still in the house.
I knew it.
Absolutely?
Absolutely.
The act was deliberate, born of a visceral fear that she might not make it out of the house alive. She didn't know if the killer, whom she now believed to be John, was still a threat, not just to her but to everyone present. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the possibility of danger. Arndt's fear was not abstract, it was grounded in the details she had observed. John's decision to cover Jonbenet's body with a blanket, despite her instructions not to touch anything, further fueled her suspicions. He had grabbed a throw from a chair and draped it over the child, an action that seemed less about comfort and more about altering the scene. To Arndt, it was another calculated move, one that could obscure evidence or shift the narrative. The way he carried Jonbenet, the way he asked if she was dead, the way he moved through the morning with a composure that felt unnatural, all of it pointed to a man who, in Arndt's mind, was not a grieving father but a perpetrator trying to control the story. The duct tape found on Jonbenet's mouth stands as a critical piece pointing to John Ramsey's potential involvement. When John emerged from the basement carrying his daughter's lifeless body, he claimed to have removed a piece of duct tape from her mouth. According to his statement, he found Jonbenet in a locked room in the basement, wrapped in a blanket with the tape covering her mouth. Forensic analysis later revealed that the tape bore a static impression of Jonbenet's lips, with no signs of movement or struggle. This suggested the tape was placed lightly on her mouth after she was already dead, as there was no evidence of resistance or saliva distortion that would indicate she was alive when it was applied. The implication is stark. If Jonbenet was deceased, there was no logical reason for an intruder to place duct tape on her mouth, as it would serve no purpose in a kidnapping scenario. The theory posits that John placed the tape as part of a staged kidnapping scene, intending to create the appearance of an external perpetrator. His decision to remove the tape upon discovering the body raises further suspicion. It is suggested that John removed it because he feared his DNA might already be present on the tape, either from handling it during the staging or from prior contact. By removing it himself, he could explain any potential DNA traces as a result of his actions during the discovery, thus preemptively deflecting forensic scrutiny. The act of removing the tape, combined with its post-mortem placement, casts doubt on John's narrative and suggests a deliberate attempt to manipulate the crime scene. The garrote found in the crime scene, fashioned from a broken paintbrush and cord, is another piece of evidence that implicates John Ramsey. The autopsy reports confirmed it was the cause of her death, with deep marks indicating significant force. The paintbrush, identified as originating from Patsy Ramsey's art kit, was broken into 3 pieces, a task requiring considerable hand strength. Experts have noted that breaking a paintbrush in this manner would be difficult for most women, particularly someone like Patsy, described as genteel and not physically robust. In contrast, most men, including John, possess the physical capability to snap a paintbrush with relative ease. This physical evidence points to a male perpetrator, and John, as a man present in the household, becomes a focal point. The paintbrush's origin from Patsy's kit might suggest her involvement, but the strength required to break it aligns more closely with John's physical profile. Furthermore, its construction suggests premeditation and familiarity with the materials available in the home, as the paintbrush was not a random object but one readily accessible in the Ramsey household. The theory suggests that John, aware of the art supplies, used the paintbrush to create a weapon that would distance the act from himself, framing it as the work of an intruder. The deliberate breaking of the paintbrush into pieces, rather than using it whole, further indicates an attempt to obscure its origin or complicate forensic analysis. A calculated move consistent with someone orchestrating a cover-up. The knot used to secure the cord to the broken paintbrush adds another layer of suspicion toward John Ramsey. The knot was described as somewhat intricate, requiring knowledge of knot-tying techniques. John's background provides a compelling connection. He served in the Navy and was an avid recreational sailor, activities that would have familiarized him with various knots. His experience with sailing, in particular, would have honed his ability to tie complex knots. This contrasts with the average person, who might not possess such specialized knowledge. The intricacy of the knot suggests that the perpetrator was not rushed or panicked, but instead acted with a degree of skill and confidence. The theory posits that John, leveraging his familiarity with knot tying, constructed the garrote to ensure it was effective while also aligning with the staged kidnapping narrative. The choice of a knot that required expertise further distances the act from a random intruder, who might not have the time or knowledge to create such a device in the Ramsey home. Instead, it points to someone with intimate knowledge of the household and the skills to execute a precise and deliberate act. Additionally, the autopsy revealed that the paintbrush was not only used to fashion the garrote, but also in a sensitive manner to abuse Jonbenet. Evidence of trauma to her private area, consistent with the use of the paintbrush handle, suggests a deeply disturbing aspect of the crime. This detail complicates the narrative of an external intruder, as it implies a level of familiarity and access to the victim that an outsider might not have. The use of the paintbrush in this manner, combined with its role, suggests a single perpetrator utilizing the same tool for multiple purposes, further indicating premeditation. John's presence in the home, his physical capability to break the paintbrush, and his potential access to the art supplies make him a plausible candidate for this act. The theory argues that John's involvement in the staging extended to using the paintbrush in a way that would shock investigators and reinforce the idea of a depraved intruder, diverting suspicion from the family. The combination of these elements, the duct tape, the garrote, The broken paintbrush and the intricate knot paints a picture of a carefully orchestrated crime scene. The duct tape's post-mortem placement and John's removal of it suggest an attempt to control the evidence. It was made from a broken paintbrush requiring significant strength, aligns with John's physical capabilities rather than Patsy's. The knot's complexity ties directly to John's naval and sailing experience, suggesting a perpetrator with specialized skills. Each piece of evidence, when examined closely, points to someone within the household who had the means, opportunity, and knowledge to stage the scene. John's actions, from removing the tape to handling the body, appear calculated to Arndt and others as efforts to obscure his involvement, while creating a narrative of an external threat. The paintbrush's dual use and the assault further implicates a perpetrator with intimate access to both the victim and the household's materials, reinforcing the suspicion that John Ramsay played a central role in the events surrounding Jonbenet's death. The events surrounding John Ramsay's actions at 10:30 a.m. on the morning of the crime provide a compelling piece of evidence that fuels suspicion against him. Detective Linda Arndt, the sole officer present at the Ramsay household for much of the day, noted that John claimed he conducted a search of the basement around 10:30 a.m., looking for anything out of place. This was hours before he officially discovered Jonbenet's body at 1:01 p.m. in the company of his friend Fleetwhite. What strikes investigators as suspicious is that John, during this earlier search, failed to check the wine cellar room where Jonbenet's body was later found. According to police reports, this room was locked when Officer French conducted an initial sweep of the house earlier that morning, and French did not enter it. John, however, had unrestricted access to the basement and the opportunity to check every room. If he was genuinely searching for his missing daughter, as he claimed, it seems implausible that he would overlook the wine cellar, a small enclosed space that could easily conceal a child or clues related to her disappearance. The theory posits that John deliberately avoided the wine cellar during his 10:30 a.m. search because he already knew Jonbenet's body was there. An innocent father, desperate to find his daughter, would likely have unlocked the door, turned on the light, and inspected every corner of the basement, including the wine cellar. His failure to do so suggests he was aware of the body's location and chose not to reveal it at that time. Instead, John reported finding nothing out of place during this search, a claim that contrasts sharply with his later discovery of Jonbenet's body in the same basement. The timing of his actions raises further questions. Why wait until 1:01 p.m., when Fleetwhite was present, to find the body? Investigators, including Arndt, theorized that John wanted to discover the body with a witness present to bolster the appearance of innocence, avoiding the scrutiny that might come with finding it alone. This calculated delay, coupled with his omission of the wine cellar during the earlier search, suggests he was orchestrating the narrative, controlling when and how the body would be revealed to deflect suspicion. The ransom note's demand for $11,000 is another critical piece of evidence that points to John Ramsay's potential involvement. The note, found by Patsy Ramsey on the staircase, explicitly demanded this peculiar amount, a figure that stands out for its specificity and its striking similarity to John's annual bonus from Access Graphics, his employer. According to financial records, John received a bonus of approximately $11,000, deposited into his 401k at the end of the year. This alignment is too precise to be dismissed as coincidence, suggesting that the author of the note had intimate knowledge of John's financial situation. The theory argues that John himself included this amount in the ransom note for several strategic reasons. First,
the so-called ransom note that was left at the Ramsey's home demands $118,000, and we now know that $118,000 is the amount of the bonus John Ramsey
who has
was
this knowledge?
expecting this year.
The wife didn't have the knowledge. She doesn't know anything about that. This is money that's electronically placed in his 401k at the end of the
Begins to tell
year. Me more about the person who's responsible. This person has a very unique, intimate knowledge about his financial workings. Therefore, the person would have to be somehow related to his employment.
First, it served as a misdirection tactic, creating a potential pool of suspects among those at Access Graphics who might have known about his bonus, such as colleagues or business associates. By pointing investigators toward his workplace, John could divert attention from himself and the household. Second, the choice of $11,000 employs a form of reverse psychology. If John were the author, including a figure so closely tied to his own finances might seem counterintuitive, as it would inevitably draw suspicion back to him. He could argue that no guilty person would incriminate themselves so overtly, thus using the specificity of the amount to paradoxically deflect blame. Investigators note that the note's author would need direct access to John's financial details. a level of knowledge unlikely to be held by an outsider. While it's possible that a close associate or employee might have learned of the bonus, John is the one person guaranteed to know the exact figure. The note's language, demanding $11,000 in cash, further complicates the intruder theory. Why demand such a precise, relatively modest sum when a kidnapper might typically ask for a round, larger figure? The theory suggests that John chose this amount because it was a sum he could feasibly withdraw without arousing significant suspicion, unlike a multi-million-dollar demand that would require complex financial arrangements. If John intended to stage a kidnapping and later claim the money was paid, a smaller amount like $11,000 could be written off as a loss without drawing extensive scrutiny from banks or authorities. Further scrutiny of the ransom note's context strengthens the case against John. The note was written on paper and with a pen belonging to the Ramsey household, indicating it was composed on site, likely during the night of the crime. This detail undermines the idea of an external intruder, as it suggests the perpetrator had ample time and familiarity with the home to craft a lengthy, detailed note. The $11,000 demand stands out as particularly incriminating because it ties directly to John's personal finances. The note's specificity contrasts with its otherwise theatrical tone, filled with dramatic phrases and instructions that seem designed to mislead. For instance, the note warns of dire consequences if the demands are not met, yet no follow-up call from the supposed kidnapper ever came. Despite the specified time window of 800 to 1000 a.m., John's lack of reaction when this deadline passed, as noted by Arndt, further fuels suspicion. He did not acknowledge the missed call or express urgency, behavior inconsistent with a father awaiting news of his kidnapped daughter. The theory posits that John wrote the note to create a false narrative, embedding the $11,000 figure to align with his plan to stage a kidnapping. By choosing an amount tied to his bonus, he could claim it was a deliberate clue pointing to someone with insider knowledge, while simultaneously betting that investigators would find it too obvious to attribute to him directly. The interplay between the 10 p.m. search and the ransom note's $11,000 demand paints a picture of calculated behavior. John's failure to check the wine cellar during his earlier search suggests he was avoiding the body until he could control the circumstances of its discovery. The ransom note, with its oddly specific demand, points to someone with intimate knowledge of John's finances, a criterion he undeniably meets. The note's presence in the home, written with household materials, further ties it to someone inside the Ramsey family. John's actions throughout the morning, his detached demeanor, his selective search, and his eventual discovery of the body with a witness, align with the theory that he was orchestrating a cover-up. The $11,000 figure, far from being a random choice, appears as a deliberate plan, designed to mislead investigators while reinforcing the staged kidnapping scenario. Together, these pieces of evidence, the inexplicable omission of the wine cellar, and the incriminating specificity of the ransom demand, build a case that John Ramsey was not a grieving father, but a man carefully manipulating the crime scene to obscure his involvement. For the other evidence, the basement window and the suitcase found beneath it constitute critical pieces of evidence that raise significant suspicion against John Ramsey, particularly when coupled with the contents of the suitcase and their implications. John claimed that he had broken the basement window months earlier after being locked out of the house, a story he provided to explain the presence of a broken pane in the basement. According to his statement, he had climbed through this window to gain entry, leaving it damaged but functional. However, the Boulder Police Department reported that the metal grate covering the window, well outside, was undisturbed on the morning of the crime, suggesting that no one had entered or exited through the window from the outside. This detail undermines the idea of an external intruder using the window as an entry point, as any such activity would likely have disturbed the grate or left visible signs in the surrounding snow or debris. Inside the basement, a scuff mark on the wall beneath the window was noted, which some theorize was intended to create the appearance of an intruder's passage. The theory posits that John manufactured this mark himself to bolster the narrative of an intruder entering through the window. If the window was already broken, as John claimed, it would have been a convenient element to incorporate into a staged scene, requiring no additional effort to create the appearance of forced entry. The undisturbed grate and the internal scuff mark suggest that any activity around the window occurred inside the basement, pointing to someone within the household, namely John, as the likely orchestrator. His prior explanation about breaking the window months earlier could be seen as a preemptive cover story designed to explain the broken glass in a way that deflects suspicion from the night of the crime. The suitcase found beneath the basement window further complicates the intruder narrative and strengthens the case against John. The suitcase, positioned directly under the broken window, was suggested by some as a step used by an intruder to climb in or out. However, its placement raises questions. If an intruder intended to use the suitcase as a step, it would likely have been positioned parallel to the wall for stability, ensuring better balance for climbing. Instead, the suitcase was found at an angle, not optimally placed for such a purpose, which suggests it was deliberately set to create the illusion of an intruder's path rather than serving a practical function. Inside the suitcase, investigators discovered a notebook and a blanket belonging to John Andrew Ramsey, John's son from a previous marriage, who was confirmed to be out of state at the time of the crime. The presence of these items is significant, as it indicates that someone within the household retrieved the suitcase and placed it under the window. John Andrew's absence eliminates him as a suspect, leaving John Ramsey as a likely candidate for handling the suitcase, given his familiarity with the household and its contents. The theory argues that John placed the suitcase there as part of a staged scene, using items associated with his son to create ambiguity and potentially implicate others. The notebook and blanket, personal items tied to a family member, add a layer of complexity to the scene, suggesting an attempt to muddy the waters and divert attention from John himself. By incorporating John Andrews' belongings, John could have been attempting to create a scenario where investigators might speculate about additional suspects or motives, further distancing himself from the crime. The suitcase and window evidence align with a broader pattern of staged elements that seem designed to create multiple suspects and confuse the investigation. For instance, the ransom note, with its specific demand of $11,000, has led to speculation about Patsy Ramsey's involvement due to its handwriting and theatrical tone, though no definitive link was established. Similarly, other items mentioned in reports, such as a Swiss Army knife and a flashlight, have been associated with Burke Ramsey, John's young son, prompting theories about his potential role, despite his age and lack of conclusive evidence. The suitcase, with its connection to John Andrew, fits into this pattern of planting evidence tied to different family members. Each item, the note, the knife, the flashlight, and now the suitcase, appears to serve as a deliberate red herring, designed to fragment suspicion across multiple individuals and obscure the true perpetrator's identity. John, as the head of the household with intimate knowledge of its contents and access to these items, is uniquely positioned to orchestrate such a multifaceted deception. The suitcase's placement under the window, combined with its contents, suggests a calculated effort to reinforce the intruder narrative while simultaneously introducing elements that could implicate others, such as John Andrew, who was not even present. The window and suitcase, when examined together, paint a picture of a carefully constructed scene that falls apart under scrutiny. If an intruder had entered through the window, as the defense suggested, they would have had to navigate the undisturbed grate and place the suitcase in a suboptimal position for climbing, all while carrying Jonbenet or intending to do so. The logistics are implausible. The window was too small to easily accommodate an adult carrying a child, and the suitcase's placement does not support the idea of an escape attempt. Moreover, if the intruder abandoned the kidnapping plan, as some suggest, they would likely have used one of the several exits John passed on his way back to the basement, rather than returning to the point of entry. The theory argues that John staged the window and suitcase to create a plausible entry point for a fictional intruder, knowing that police would focus on this as a potential clue. The inclusion of John Andrews' notebook and blanket in the suitcase adds a layer of misdirection, leveraging the absence of a family member to complicate the investigation. John's claim about breaking the window months earlier, combined with his failure to mention the suitcase's contents initially, suggests he was shaping the narrative to align with a staged crime scene. These elements, the undisturbed grate, the ill-placed suitcase, and the personal items tied to John Andrew, point to John as the architect of a deliberate attempt to mislead investigators, using the physical layout of the basement and carefully selected items to obscure his involvement and create a web of alternative suspects. So, in the end, what John did in the Christmas night? Let's go for the complete timeline of this case. About what really happened. What if we had a theory that Burke was the main reason John caused this crime and his plan turned his wife and son into shields, creating his own alibi in Jonbenet's death? The core of this theory hinges on the idea that Burke Ramsey unintentionally injured Jonbenet, setting off a chain of events that John Ramsey masterfully exploited to protect himself and complete the crime. After the Ramsey family returned home from a party, Burke ventured downstairs to snack on pineapple and play with his toys, possibly his train set. Jonbenet, hearing her brother, joined him in the basement, and the two shared a light snack of pineapple served in milk, likely prepared earlier by a maid given the complexity of the task for a young child. The pineapple, found in a bowl with a glass and a tea bag, was significant because neither John nor Patsy seemed aware that Jonbenet had eaten it, ruling them out as preparers. Burke, Known for behavioral issues such as a prior incident where he struck Jonbenet with a golf club and other troubling behaviors, grew frustrated as Jonbenet annoyed him during his playtime. In a moment of anger, he grabbed an object, possibly a flashlight, and struck her, causing her to collapse, unconscious. Panicked, Burke tried to rouse his sister, even prodding her with train tracks in a desperate attempt to wake her, but she remained unresponsive. Concerned for her or fearful for himself, he ran to get his mother, Patsy, informing her that Jonbenet was hurt and wouldn't wake up. This unintentional act by Burke, a child with documented behavioral challenges, set the stage for John's calculated intervention, transforming an accident into a meticulously staged crime. When Patsy, or possibly both parents, reached the basement, they found Jonbenet appearing lifeless, though she was still alive. John, described as calm and rational, immediately assessed the situation and recognized a dire threat to himself. An autopsy would reveal his unacceptable problems with Jonbenet, the prior abuse, exposing him to severe legal consequences. This suspicion arose in the early stage of this case, as mentioned in an interview that.
So let me go through what the motives are. Motive number one. You are guilty, Mr. Ramsey, because there was some evidence that your daughter had been sexually molested.
I know, as best I can know, as a father who was with his daughter every day that I was home, she was not sexually abused or molested before December 26th.
Okay, but on December 26th, there are some indications that your daughter molested.
Well,
therefore, here's the motive. You were doing it. Maybe you'd done it before. Maybe you just did it that night. Perhaps your wife discovered you. Whatever it was, Jonbenet cried out. You killed her.
To shield himself, John devised a plan to stage a kidnapping and shift blame onto Patsy. He convinced her that Jonbenet's apparent death, caused by Burke's blow, would implicate the entire family, particularly Burke, and could lead to legal trouble or the loss of their wealth and status. Patsy, in a state of panic and desperate to protect her son and their lifestyle, believed John's narrative and agreed to participate in the cover-up, unaware of his history of abuse. John deliberately withheld this information, manipulating Patsy's fear and trust to ensure her compliance. His plan was not to protect Burke but to frame Patsy as the primary culprit, orchestrating a scenario where she would leave incriminating evidence while he minimized his own exposure. This manipulation was pivotal, as it allowed John to control the narrative and direct the staging, ensuring that Patsy's actions would draw scrutiny while he remained in the background. As part of the staging, John instructed Patsy to assist in creating the appearance of a kidnapping. But when she was not present, he took a chilling step to further his deception. Using a paintbrush from Patsy's art kit, he performed a mild act of abuse on Jonbenet, intending for any autopsy to attribute prior abuse to this act, thereby concealing his earlier crimes. The choice of the paintbrush, an item clearly linked to Patsy, was deliberate, designed to implicate her further. He left the paintbrush at the scene, broken into pieces to form a tool to kill Jonbenet, reinforcing the narrative of a violent intruder while tying the evidence to Patsy's possessions. Unbeknownst to John, an autopsy would later distinguish between the recent paintbrush assault and evidence of prior abuse, undermining his attempt to mask his history. To cover his tracks, John meticulously wiped down surfaces and objects that might carry his or Burke's DNA or fingerprints, such as the flashlight or train tracks, but intentionally left untouched any evidence linked to Patsy, like the paintbrush and other household items used in the staging. This selective cleanup ensured that investigators would find a trail leading to Patsy, while John's involvement remained obscured, positioning him as a grieving father rather than a perpetrator. The ransom note, a cornerstone of the staged kidnapping, further illustrates John's manipulation of Patsy. He directed her to write the note, providing loose guidelines while he focused on eliminating evidence of his and Burke's involvement, including taking a shower to remove any physical traces from his body. The note demanded $11,000, a sum matching John's annual bonus from Access Graphics, a detail only someone with intimate knowledge of his finances would know. Patsy, in her frantic state, wrote the note using paper and a pen from the Ramsey household, possibly drawing inspiration from a biblical passage and the bonus figure she was aware of. The note's disorganized tone and theatrical language reflected her panic, but John approved it, knowing its flaws would point directly to Patsy. He instructed her to include a demand that he leave the house with a suitcase to collect the ransom, providing a pretext for moving Jonbenet's body if the original plan to dump it elsewhere proceeded. Later, John's swift action in handing investigators the notepad from which the note was written was a calculated move to link Patsy to the evidence, reinforcing her role as the apparent mastermind. By orchestrating the note's creation and ensuring its imperfections, John crafted a piece of evidence that would incriminate Patsy while aligning with his broader strategy to stage a kidnapping and shift blame, all while protecting himself from the consequences of his prior actions. However, the initial plan to dispose of Jonbenet's body outside the home quickly unraveled as John Ramsey assessed the risks. The scheme involved placing her body in a suitcase belonging to his son from a previous marriage, John Andrew Ramsey, who was confirmed to be out of state at the time of the crime. The suitcase was intended to serve as a means to transport the body to another location, reinforcing the staged kidnapping narrative. However, John realized that leaving the house with the suitcase posed significant dangers. Being seen by neighbors or stopped by authorities could expose him. He convinced Patsy that the body wouldn't fit in the suitcase, or that the act of disposing of it was too perilous, citing the possibility of detection. Instead, he proposed hiding the body in a less conspicuous location within the house, specifically the wine cellar in the basement, a room that was difficult to find and had been overlooked during earlier searches. To maintain the illusion of a kidnapping, John suggested inviting friends to the house, using the ransom note as a pretext to draw them into the search for Jonbenet. His intention will create a scenario where these friends could be implicated if the intruder theory failed to convince investigators. He knew the ransom note, written by Patsy under his guidance, would point directly to her under scrutiny, as its handwriting and style bore her imprint. By keeping the body in the house, John ensured that the crime scene remained under his control, allowing him to manipulate the narrative while setting Patsy up as the primary suspect. The actual cause of Jonbenet's death and the subsequent further implicate John's calculated approach. During the staging process, John directed Patsy to perform specific tasks, including fashioning a tool from a cord and a broken paintbrush to create the appearance of a violent attack. Believing Jonbenet was already dead from Burke's earlier blow, they proceeded with this act, unaware that the later cause was what ultimately killed her. When Patsy later learned that her tool caused Jonbenet's death, her visceral reaction, marked by shock and anguish, suggested she had been mellowed into thinking the child was already deceased. John ensured that Patsy's involvement in the staging left a trail of evidence, from handling the paintbrush to tying the cord, while he took steps to eliminate his own traces. He showered to remove any physical evidence of his body and disposed of his clothing, ensuring no fibers or DNA linked him to the scene. In contrast, he deliberately denied Patsy the opportunity to shower or change, leaving fibers from her clothing, such as those from her jacket, on the body and other items, further incriminating her. This selective preservation of evidence tied to Patsy, while erasing his own, underscores John's intent to frame her as the orchestrator of the crime, leveraging her panic and compliance to build a case against her. Burke's behavior during this time, guided by his parents' instructions, also plays into John's strategy. Told to stay in his room and not emerge until permitted, Burke remained awake throughout the night, aware of the earlier incident with Jonbenet, unaware of the full scope of his parents' actions. During the 911 call initiated by Patsy, Burke briefly appeared, asking, "What did you find?"
Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got up and she's right here. Oh my God, please.
Okay, girl.
There's somebody.
I am, honey.
Please.
Take a deep breath.
Please,
Okay.
hurry, hurry, hurry.
Patsy, 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 Patsy. Patsy?
This question, referencing Jonbenet's condition, suggests he knew something was wrong from the moment he struck her and saw her unconscious. His parents, likely John, sharply instructed him to return to his room, reinforcing the simple alibi that he was asleep all night. This narrative, easy for a child to maintain, required no detailed recollection and protected Burke from scrutiny. John crafted a similarly straightforward story for himself, claiming he slept through the night and only learned of the situation when he heard Patsy scream, a lie that minimized his exposure to contradictions. By ensuring that both his and Burke's alibis were uncomplicated, John reduced the risk of either slipping up under questioning, while Patsy's involvement in the staging and note writing left her vulnerable to inconsistencies. John's overarching goal was not to con authorities of an intruder for the long term, but to manipulate Patsy into leaving a trail of incriminating evidence. The ransom note, the paintbrush tool, and the fibers from Patsy's clothing were deliberately left to point to her, while John meticulously erased traces of himself and Burke. He invited 4 friends to the house, excluding their closest allies, to create opportunities for them to contaminate the crime scene or become suspects if the intruder narrative faltered. When the friends failed to find the body, John took matters into his own hands, discovering Jonbenet in the wine cellar while accompanied by Fleet White. By touching the body and removing the duct tape and bindings, he provided a plausible explanation for any of his DNA that might be found, while encouraging others to handle the scene, further muddying the evidence. This act aligned with his strategy to create confusion and multiple suspects, as other items, like a Swiss Army knife linked to Burke or John Andrews' suitcase, introduced additional red herrings. John's immediate handover of the notepad used for the ransom note to investigators was a calculated move to cement Patsy's connection to it, reinforcing her as the primary suspect. The success of John's plan hinged on the accumulation of evidence against Patsy and the simplicity of his and Burke's alibis. The incompetence of police and the leniency of the district attorney's office allowed the plan to exceed expectations. As scrutiny remained focused on the flawed intruder theory and Patsy's inconsistent narrative, items like the knife, flashlight, and suitcase, each tied to different family members, created a complex web of suspicion that obscured John's role. By showering and disposing of his clothes, John ensured minimal physical evidence linked him to the crime, while Patsy's unchanged clothing and involvement in the staging left her exposed. His decision to abandon the plan to dump the body, coupled with the strategic use of friends and the ransom note, allowed him to maintain control over the scene while directing blame toward Patsy. The hypothesis emphasizes that John alone knew the full truth, orchestrating every step to shield himself from allegations of prior abuse and position Patsy as the fall guy, leveraging her trust and panic to execute a plan that left her bearing the brunt of suspicion. It can be seen that the main motive for John committing this crime lies in the allegations of abuse toward Jonbenet. But are there any pieces of evidence that truly support those claims? Let's begin with his role and his strange absence within the family. Linda Wilcox, a former housekeeper who served the Ramseys from 1993 until September 1995, described him as a man who enforced strict personal habits, such as never wearing shoes inside the home. This was evident in an incident during a Thanksgiving flood in the house, when John, in stocking feet, stepped into a still wet bathtub to close a window, revealing a flash of anger through his eyes despite his outward calm. His sensitivity to noise further defined his presence. Wilcox recounted a moment in the summer of 1995 when John abruptly turned off her vacuum cleaner while she was cleaning the master bedroom, without a word, his expression conveying irritation at the disruption. This act, coupled with his minimal interaction with household staff, painted him as a figure who valued control and quiet, often retreating to his own space. Wilcox noted that he treated her like furniture, engaged only briefly, such as during a cursory introduction in the kitchen, which underscored his detached and professional approach to those around him. His personal belongings reflected a structured life, a Bible embossed with John and Patsy Ramsey sat on his desk or bedside, always marked with a bookmark, indicating regular reading, while a large photograph of an aircraft carrier labeled Subic Bay Training Center hung behind his bedroom desk, its faint script blending into the image's water. The relationship between John and Patsy Ramsey lacked the warmth typically associated with a marital bond, appearing more like a business arrangement than a partnership of affection. Wilcox, who observed their interactions over 2.5 years, described them as behaving like two people who are amicably divorced, or business associates, with Patsy acting more like John's secretary than his wife. Her primary role seemed to be ensuring John's comfort, such as minimizing noise to avoid disturbing him, as seen in the vacuum incident. The couple maintained separate bathrooms within their master suite, a detail Wilcox found unusual, as neither used the other's space, reinforcing their emotional and physical separation. She believed their intimate life was minimal, if not non-existent, based on her observations of their bedroom, which lacked the small signs of affection, like notes or personal mementos, she saw in other clients' homes. For instance, Wilcox contrasted the Ramseys with another couple she worked for, where affectionate notes and heart-decorated items revealed a closeness absent in John and Patsy's dynamic. This lack of intimacy was further highlighted during Patsy's serious illness, when she underwent surgery for cancer. While Nidra, Patsy's mother, remained by her side or in the waiting area with a rosary, John was notably absent, a fact Wilcox found striking, suggesting a disconnect even in moments of crisis. John's frequent absences from the family home, driven by his business commitments, left Patsy manage the household and children largely on her own. Linda Hoffman-Pugh, who worked as the Ramsey housekeeper after Wilcox, noted that Patsy often spent time alone in the expansive house while John was away on business trips. These trips kept him physically distant, and his engagement with family life appeared limited, even when he was present. Wilcox observed that John rarely participated in daily childcare tasks, leaving them to Patsy or the nanny, Suzanne Savage. In one instance, John complained about having to dress Jonbenet one morning when Suzanne was unavailable, struggling because Jonbenet lacked her own clothes and wore Burke's hand-me-downs, a task that visibly frustrated him. His approach to parenting was hands-off, often resorting to quick fixes like giving Jonbenet a bottle and a video to get her to sleep, a habit Wilcox noted persisted despite Jonbenet being too old for a bottle at 3 or 4 years old. This detachment extended to interactions with the household's daily operations. Patsy managed the staff and home logistics, while John focused on his career, a dynamic reinforced by Nadra's frequent directive, "John Ramsey, go earn that money," as he left for work. The emotional distance John exhibited within the family was further underscored by his handling of personal mementos, particularly related to his late daughter, Beth, from a previous marriage. Wilcox found it peculiar that John kept a college frame of Beth's photographs, who died in an accident, in his private bathroom, an unconventional and private location for such a sentimental item. Initially, the frame was not even hung but placed between the sunken bathtub and the wall, out of sight from the rest of the household. After a flood caused by an open window and running faucet damaged the house, the frame was moved to the wall behind the bathroom door, still within John's exclusive space. Wilcox, who had experienced significant loss in her own family, found this placement odd, as she kept her own memorial photos in albums or more public areas of the home. The choice to keep Beth's images in an intimate yet isolated setting suggested a private connection to his past that John did not share with Patsy or his children, further highlighting his emotional withdrawal from the family. This was particularly striking given that the bathroom was exclusively his, reinforcing a boundary between his personal grief and the family's shared spaces. John's limited involvement in family life extended to his interactions with Jonbenet and Burke, where he seemed more a figure of authority than a nurturing presence. Hoffman-Pugh noted that Patsy bore the brunt of childcare, organizing the children's schedules and activities while John was often away or disengaged. His rare moments of involvement, like dressing Jonbenet, revealed a lack of familiarity with her needs, as he struggled to find appropriate clothing. Wilcox also observed that Jonbenet received little affection from either parent when she was younger, particularly before she began participating in pageants, which later became a focal point for Patsy. John's approach to Jonbenet's sleeplessness, using a bottle and video, indicated a pragmatic but detached method, prioritizing convenience over emotional connection. This pattern aligned with his broader absence from the family's daily emotional landscape, leaving Patsy and the household staff to fill the gaps. Nadra's presence in the home, especially during Patsy's illness, further compensated for John's lack of involvement, as she took on significant caregiving roles for the children. The physical separation of John and Patsy's personal spaces within the home mirrored their emotional divide. The separate bathrooms, a detail Wilcox emphasized as unusual, symbolized their independent lives under the same roof. John's bathroom, with its private collage of Beth's photos, served as a sanctuary for his personal reflections, inaccessible to Patsy or the children. Meanwhile, Patsy's space was cluttered with the demands of motherhood and household management, as described by Hoffman-Pugh, who noted the constant mess of children's clothes and dishes that Patsy struggled to keep up with. John's meticulous habits, never wearing shoes, keeping his desk orderly with items like his watch and change, contrasted with Patsy's more chaotic environment, further illustrating their differing roles and lack of shared intimacy. Wilcox's observation that John's side of the bed held suspense thrillers and business books, while Patsy's had women's novels and poetry, underscored their divergent interests and personalities, reinforcing the sense that they operated as separate entities rather than a cohesive unit. John's absence during critical moments, such as Patsy's cancer treatment, was a significant point of concern for those who observed the family. Wilcox noted that while Nadra was a constant presence, praying or staying by Patsy's side, John's absence during these life-threatening moments was conspicuous. This pattern of disengagement extended to his interactions with the household staff, whom he rarely acknowledged beyond basic necessities. Hoffman-Pugh described John as orderly, rarely leaving items like shoes for her to pick up, unlike Patsy, whose belongings were scattered across the house. This contrast highlighted John's detachment from the household's daily chaos, as he maintained a controlled personal environment while leaving family responsibilities to others. His professional focus, as evidenced by Nadra's encouragement to earn that money, positioned him as the provider, but at the cost of emotional presence, leaving Patsy to navigate the complexities of parenting and household management alone. The peculiar placement of Beth's photographs in John's bathroom remained a point of intrigue for Wilcox, who saw it as emblematic of his private nature. Unlike typical memorial displays in shared family spaces, the college's location suggested a personal, almost secretive reverence for his late daughter, kept apart from Patsy and the children. The frame's initial placement, tucked away between the bathtub and wall, indicated a desire to keep this memory hidden, only relocated to the wall after the flood necessitated a change. Wilcox's own experience with loss led her to question why John chose such an unconventional spot, as it contrasted with her practice of keeping memorial photos in albums or communal areas. This choice reflected John's tendency to compartmentalize his emotions, maintaining a private connection to Beth that did not intersect with his current family life, further emphasizing his emotional distance from Patsy and their children. For the central evidence for the accusation of abusing, Linda Hoffman-Poog noted that Patsy was the primary caregiver who managed the children's daily needs, including their medical appointments. Records from Dr. Francesco Bioff, Jonbenet's pediatrician, indicate that Jonbenet was seen approximately 27 times between 1993 and 1996, an average of about 9 visits per year. These visits, as reported in sources like Perfect Murder, Perfect Town by Lawrence Schiller, covered routine checkups, vaccinations, and treatments for common childhood ailments such as colds, ear infections, and minor injuries. John's direct participation in these visits was rarely mentioned, suggesting he was not typically present. Jonbenet's medical records, as provided to investigators, revealed several health concerns that raised questions about her care and potential underlying issues. Dr. Biff's records, discussed in a March 997 Boulder Daily Camera article, documented frequent visits for issues like respiratory infections, allergies, and occasional injuries, such as a fall that required a checkup. However, the most notable and persistent issue was Jonbenet's bedwetting, which both Wilcox and Hoffman reported as a chronic problem. Wilcox, who worked for the Ramseys when Jonbenet was between 2.5 and 4 years old, noted that the bedwetting became more frequent over time, contrary to expectations that it would decrease as she aged. By the summer of 1996, Hoffman-Poog observed that Jonbenet was using pull-ups at night and often had a wet bed in the morning, with Patsy routinely removing the sheets and placing the white blanket in the dryer before the housekeeper arrived. This issue was significant enough that Patsy decided against continuing pull-ups, opting instead for a plastic cover on the bed, treating it as a minor inconvenience. Wilcox found it curious that John claimed ignorance of the bedwetting, as she recalled him mentioning it directly, such as when he asked her to change Jonbenet's bed after an incident, suggesting he was at least occasionally aware of the problem. The chronic bedwetting sparked concerns among observers and investigators, as it was seen as a potential indicator of stress or deeper issues. Wilcox noted that both Jonbenet and her brother Burke wet the bed, with Burke's issue resolving around the time Patsy shifted her attention to Jonbenet's pageants, while Jonbenet's worsened. This pattern led some to speculate whether emotional or psychological factors, possibly related to family dynamics or external pressures, contributed to the problem. The Boulder Daily Camera article highlighted that investigators explored whether poor hygiene could explain certain health findings, such as chronic inflammation noted in the coroner's report. Some experts suggested that asymptomatic bladder infections, common in young girls, could cause irritation and contribute to bedwetting, while others cautioned that such symptoms might mask more serious concerns. The frequent medical visits for minor ailments, combined with the bedwetting, raised questions about whether Jonbenet's care was consistent or if underlying issues were overlooked, though Dr. Biff's records reportedly show of a history of abuse in the family. Suspicions of abuse emerged primarily from the coroner's report, which noted signs of prior assault, including chronic inflammation and epithelial erosion, as detailed in the Boulder Daily Camera article. Dr. Cyril Wecht affirmed that these findings suggested an incident at least 2 days before Jonbenet's death, prompting speculation about ongoing abuse. The article emphasized conflicting expert opinions, with some attributing the inflammation to poor hygiene or infections, while others, like Dr. Richard Krugman, noted that abuse in children often leaves subtle or no physical evidence in routine exams, making behavioral cues critical. Burke's videotaped interview with a psychiatrist, arranged by the Boulder County Department of Social Services, was cited as showing no knowledge of unusual problems with his sister, though the reliability of his statements was questioned by independent investigators. John and Patsy provided Dr. Biff's records and allowed him and his nurses to speak with investigators, a voluntary act since police lacked subpoena power to demonstrate no history of abuse. However, The focus on John as a potential suspect in these allegations was prominent early in the investigation, with attention later shifting to Burke as a secondary figure, though no definitive evidence emerged. The family's cooperation in providing medical records and interviews contrasted with their delayed formal questioning by police. As noted in the Boulder Daily Camera, John's absence from Jonbenet's medical visits mirrored his broader detachment from her daily care, as described by Wilcox, who recalled his frustration with tasks like dressing Jonbenet when the nanny was unavailable. This incident, where he struggled to find matching clothes and resorted to Burke's hand-me-downs, underscored his limited involvement. Hoffman-Puig's account of Patsy's management of Jonbenet's bedwetting, handling the laundry and dismissing the issue casually, further suggested that John was not engaged in addressing this concern. The suspicions of abuse, fueled by the coroner's findings, led investigators to explore the family's history, including Patsy's past and even the autopsy report of John's deceased daughter, Beth, from a prior marriage, though no evidence of prior interference was found. The article noted that experts debated whether the physical signs pointed to chronic abuse or could be explained by benign causes, with some Ramsey apologists, like Paula Woodward, asserting at CrimeCon that significant abuse occurred on the night of Jonbenet's death, a claim contradicted by other interpretations in the article that downplayed such specificity. The investigation into John Ramsey's potential involvement hinges on several pieces of evidence that remain under scrutiny, requiring further validation to establish him as the perpetrator. One critical area is the presence of DNA linking John directly to the murder weapon or Jonbenet's body. Current findings indicate foreign DNA on her underwear and leggings, which does not match John's profile, suggesting an outside individual. However, advancements in DNA technology, such as genealogical analysis, are being explored to isolate and identify the source of this DNA. If new testing were to match John's DNA to the rope or other crime scene items, beyond what could be explained by routine household contact, it would provide definitive proof of his involvement. As of now, this avenue remains under active research, with no conclusive link established. Another focal point is the analysis of fibers and hairs found at the scene, particularly those potentially tied to John's clothing. Black fibers on Jonbenet's underwear have been noted as compatible with a sweater John wore that night, but this does not yet confirm a direct connection to the crime, as such fibers could result from everyday contact. Ongoing investigations aim to re-examine these fibers using advanced forensic techniques to determine if they match John's clothing with greater specificity, ruling out contamination from household sources. Until such precision is achieved, the fiber evidence remains suggestive but not conclusive, awaiting further analysis to clarify its significance. The ransom note demanding $90,000, a figure matching John's bonus, raises questions about his potential authorship. Handwriting analysis has so far excluded John as the writer, though Patsy has not been fully ruled out. The note, written on paper and with a pen from the Ramsey home, requires deeper scrutiny, such as fingerprint analysis or linguistic comparison to John's other writings, to establish undeniable authorship. Current efforts involve comparing the note to additional family documents to identify unique stylistic markers. But without a definitive match, this evidence remains pending, leaving open the possibility of John's involvement. Suspicions of a sensitive motive or prior abuse by John stem from the autopsy report noting trauma to Jonbenet's genital area. However, no medical records or DNA conclusively tie John to such acts before or during the crime. Some experts speculate the injuries could indicate an accidental death followed by a cover-up, but this theory lacks direct evidence. Ongoing reanalysis of medical records and DNA samples aims to clarify whether John was responsible for any abuse, but as it stands, these claims remain unproven, reliant on further forensic breakthroughs. The flashlight, suspected as the weapon causing Jonbenet's injury, presents another unresolved lead. Found wiped clean of fingerprints, including on its batteries, its unusual placement suggests possible use and concealment. If John's fingerprints or DNA were recovered through advanced forensic methods, it could confirm his use of the flashlight as a weapon. Current research focuses on applying new techniques to detect latent traces, but no such evidence has yet emerged, leaving this aspect open for investigation. The presence of undigested pineapple in Jonbenet's stomach, contradicting claims she slept immediately after returning home, raises questions about John's role. Fingerprints of Patsy and Burke were found on a bowl of pineapple, but none from Jonbenet, suggesting a possible cover-up. Establishing whether John fed her the pineapple requires witness testimony or physical evidence, such as his fingerprints on related items. Ongoing efforts aim to pinpoint the timing of the pineapple consumption and John's involvement, but no clear connection exists yet. John's behavior at the scene, including moving Jonbenet's body and thus contaminating evidence, fuels suspicion of a cover-up. His lack of reaction when the supposed kidnappers call time passed and plans to leave Boulder shortly after the incident are notable but not conclusive. A definitive polygraph test or video evidence showing deliberate tampering could solidify these suspicions. Current psychological profiling and call log analyses continue to probe these inconsistencies, but they remain circumstantial, awaiting stronger substantiation. After all, the unresolved nature of this case offers profound lessons about the complexities of grief, justice, and public perception. At its core, it underscores the enduring pain of a family who lost a young child, a tragedy that remains unaided by the absence of a definitive conclusion. John Ramsey, along with his family, continues to bear the weight of this loss, compounded by relentless scrutiny and speculation. This serves as a stark reminder that, without an official resolution, those involved remain victims of an unimaginable sorrow, their lives forever altered by a wound that has not healed. The absence of closure does not diminish their grief but amplifies it, as they navigate a world that often views them through a lens of suspicion rather than empathy. This teaches us the importance of withholding judgment in the face of ambiguity, recognizing that the human cost of tragedy extends far beyond the headlines. The case also highlights the delicate balance between seeking truth and respecting the dignity of those involved. Investigations, by necessity, probe deeply into personal lives, but the public's rush to assign blame can inflict additional harm. The Ramsey family's experience illustrates how quickly personal opinions, fueled by incomplete information, can overshadow compassion. Until a formal conclusion is reached, treating speculation as fact risks further wounding those already suffering. This lesson urges restraint in forming narratives, encouraging us to prioritize evidence over emotion, and to approach such cases with a humility that acknowledges our limited perspective. Respecting the individuals involved means holding space for their humanity, recognizing that they are more than figures in a public drama, but people enduring profound loss. Finally, the case reveals the limits of justice in the face of uncertainty. The ongoing lack of resolution challenges our desire for clear answers and exposes the imperfections of investigative processes. It reminds us that truth is not always attainable, yet the pursuit of it must be tempered with fairness. For John and the Ramsey family, the absence of a verdict does not negate their suffering or their right to be seen as victims of a tragedy. This teaches us to approach unresolved cases with patience, resisting the urge to fill gaps with assumptions. Instead, we should advocate for thorough, evidence-based investigations while maintaining respect for those entangled in the aftermath. The enduring lesson is one of compassion, urging us to honor the pain of those affected, and to hold our judgments lightly until the truth is fully revealed.